There we go. Sorry.
Right. Okay, so this talk's called the French Borough, which was the area that the Normans created soon after the invasion when they came to Norwich. And it's actually based around a guided tour that I developed soon after I became a Norwich City tour guide. We were encouraged to develop our own tours, and I was interested really what lay behind City Hall, because most of the tours I was doing were going in the opposite direction. So this is heading westwards, and basically we're going to make our way virtually up one side of City Hall and back down the other, going up Bethel Street and then back down St Giles. So let's begin. I'll try that again. There we are. This is the screen that I wanted. If you go to the forum, you can see this plaque on the right-hand side as you were looking at it from St Peter Mancroft. And it says, "This stone was unveiled by His Excellency, Monsieur Daniel Bernard, Ambassador of France, to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the twinning of Norwich and Rouen, and to commemorate the site of the French borough, founded here between 1071 and 1075 by William the Conqueror and Ralph de Garda." And this nicely sums up the area that we're going to be looking at. Not just as it was in the time of the Normans, but how it's been used over the years. So we're going to start with just looking at what Norwich looked like when the Normans came. By that time, we had, this is a map of possibly what late Saxon and Anglo-Scandinavian Norwich looked like. So the Scandinavian part was over north of the river in this area here, and that had the settlement of Norwich, which of course later gave its name to the city of Norwich. And this is the Anglo-Saxon extension that happened. And you'll notice the Great Cocky running down there, which still runs, of course, but now in a culvert. And then it was the boundary of the western side of the Anglo-Saxon settlement when the Normans came. And there was a big empty field here, possibly the Magna Crofta, a great field, which might have given its name to St Peter Mancroft. This is a slightly more detailed version of it, and we can see the positions, we think anyway, of the settlements that amalgamated to form the city of Norwich. Those of Cosney, Norwich itself, Conesford, Westwick, and of course down here we had, oh, I've just gone blank. It'll come to me. Anyway, another settlement down there, but we'll deal with that later. This is an artist's view of possibly what the aerial view of Norwich at that time, Anglo-Saxon Norwich, might have looked like. And again, we've got the Norwich area to the north, the Anglo-Saxon area to the south, and the two main east-west and north-south roads that ran between the city and were major crossing points. In fact, this was the lowest bridging point, because you have to remember in those days the river soon widened out into a great estuary and all the way out to sea, you know, long before Great Yarmouth was formed. And the Anglo-Saxon marketplace was where these two met in Tombland. And of course, when the Normans came, they decided to change it quite a lot. A large chunk of Tombland was taken for the development of their cathedral. They also flattened a large area. Well, actually, they increased it rather than flatten it, because they put to the motte there on which the castle was built. And in front of it, the new site of the marketplace. And this area on the other side of the marketplace was where the French borough began in 1071 to 1075. So Norwich really got its first charter in 1194, from King Richard I when it was ruled by a provost. But in 1223, Henry VIII granted Norwich a further charter, which allowed them to be ruled by 4 bailiffs, and they rode over the 4 areas, or 4 leets as they were known: Conesford, Mancroft, Westwick, and over the water. What's interesting here is it's often said that the French borough, the French started 3 new parishes, that of St Stephen's, you can see St Stephen down there, St Peter Mancroft, and St Giles. But it's interesting that in the 13th century anyway, the area of St Giles was lumped in with Westwick. When we got our next charter in 1404, which allowed us to rule ourselves and elect a mayor and 2 sheriffs, the 4 leets were changed to 4 wards of Conesford, Weimar, over the water, and Mancroft. And here we can see that St Giles has been included in the Mancroft ward. Even that, this is the area we're going to be going along as we make our way around the French borough, but we can even see there that the parish of not Giles, that will come to me in a minute as well, also seem to eat into the area that we would normally regard as the French borough. This is an enlargement of Cunningham's map of 1558, and it more or less shows the route that we're going to take and looking at the area. So going from St Peter Mancroft along Bethel Street up to Upper St Giles and back down St Giles, with 1 or 2 excursions down side streets and alleyways. And again, it's quite interesting to see here that Bethel Street seems to go straight to the west door of St Peter Mancroft, according to Cunningham anyway, whereas nowadays, of course, it bends round slightly and comes out to the marketplace to the northern side of Peter Mancroft. I've also highlighted St Giles here because that was another of the churches or the parishes that became part of the French borough. And this is an aerial view produced by the UEA Digital Modelling Group of Norwich as it was circa 1500. And again, we can see our marketplace here, the new marketplace with the Guildhall, built by then, and the church of Peter Mancroft, although they seem to have modelled the one that was originally built by Ralph de Garda, or at least the way we think it looked, because that was completely rebuilt and looking different, with a tower at this end in the 15th century, so it wouldn't have been there in 1500. But roughly we're going to make our way down towards St Giles Church and back up again. So the first thing that you come to that the Normans established was, of course, the new marketplace, and this is the general layout. This time on this map we've got north to our right hand side, and this would be the area where City Hall is now. And it's interesting to see that there was typical medieval burgage plots there, with people having a short frontage onto the market itself, but large buildings going back, the burgage plots stretching back, and there were a series of small roads that went westerly out of the marketplace, and indeed survived all the way up until the 1930s, when they were remodelled and the City Hall was placed on there, of course. And this is a 19th century look at the marketplace, and again this time we've got north to the top of the map, and this comes from Francis and Michael Holmes' book on Norwich pubs, and we can see all the pubs that surrounded the market. There were in fact 19 by the end of the 19th century. They're marked in blue, and we are now left with one, the Sir Garnet Wolsey. In fact, we're actually left with two because the Cigarnet expanded in and took over the Punch Bowl, although it is at the moment only one pub, as we can see. And there's a photograph, not very clear, but of the area. There's the Cigarnet number 3, and there's the Punch Bowl next to it. The Half Moon has long since gone, as are the other buildings that are on the marketplace. And these were removed at the building of the City Hall. I talked about the small lanes leading out of the western side of the market, and these are some examples of some of them. There's Pope's Head Yard was one, Wounded Heart Lane, and Dat's Court. This is Pope's Head Yard with the inn and the Pope's Head. The Wounded Heart, we can see there, and that's Wounded Heart Lodge on the bottom of the picture there. And it's quite interesting, up to 1836, it was spelt H-E-A-R-T, and it was the Wounded Heart. It only became an animal after that period. And if you went along St. Peter's Street and you got to the corner with Bethel Street, you would come to this building, which was a pub for quite a while known as the Eldon Stores. As now we can see that in this picture it's the Mancroft Restaurant. If we were looking up Bethel Street, we'd see yet another pub, the Wheatsheaf, and this was in the area out of the market, but the market spilled into the adjoining areas, and one of them was the old barley market. And it has been suggested that perhaps when this originated, this in fact was a barley sheaf. I can't seem to get my cursor on it at the moment. There we go. This was a barley sheaf rather than a wheat sheaf. Anyway, it became the Wheatsheaf pub. And if we turned round and looked in the opposite direction, we would see on the other side of Bethel Street, this would be the King's Head, and these would have been the stables opposite the Wheatsheaf and the Wheatsheaf stabling. And if we then turned our heads and looked in the opposite direction down Bethel Street towards the western side, you'd come across the Old Theatre Tavern. So there were an awful lot of pubs, not just actually on the marketplace, but surrounding it as well. These are again on the Bethel Street. This is what this looked like up until the 1930s. Most of these were removed, cleared away for the building of City Hall. George Plunkett said of these, it's his photo, this, the houses affected were numbers 20 to 36 Bethel Street, together with Blaisby's Yard and Jay's Court at the rear. Most of the houses fronting the street were of the Tudor period, timber framed, plaster faced, with slightly jetted first floor and with one or more dormers lighting the attic, except that at number 36, next door to Lacey and Lincoln's Builders' Yard. That had been a public house known as the Coachmaker's Arms. Their history seems to have been uneventful, and all were in a very run-down condition at the time of their disappearance. And they disappeared, and if you looked at that area today, you would see what was the old fire station, which is now Sir Isaac Newton's Sixth Form College. Why was it listed? Well, according to the listing, it was because of its architectural quality of design, portraying gravitas and authority combined with successful functionality. Pevsner has said of this, it's one of the best examples of municipal town planning in England. And of course, it was Art Deco, and it had the metallic crittle windows. We see an example of there. And there was an interesting OG-shaped window with Art Deco ironwork underneath on the balcony and over the doorways, although that's not metalwork. and we can see again on some of the vents. And next to it was the Weights and Measures building, which was also a very fine Art Deco designed building. However, I think probably the most interesting bit of this building was the weather vane that we can see up there, where we've got, it's rather like the Keystone Cops, I think. We've got 5 firemen there and someone in front running, giving a warning. Going further up Bethel Street, we would come to what was the old skating rink, now the South Asian Decorative and Arts and Crafts Collection, which has a spectacular wooden roof designed by Edward Boardman. It was not much of a success. It opened in September 1876 and cost nearly £10,000. But it closed again in June 1877 and didn't even last really for a year. It was not taken to by the people of Norwich. And despite attempts at vaudeville and pantomime and another go at skating, it failed and became taken over as the Salvation Army Citadel. And General Booth has preached there. And soon after that, it, of course, became the area of Lacey and Lincoln's Builders Yard, which it stayed until 1993, before it turned into the South Asian Decorative Arts and Crafts Collection. And here we've got a picture of possibly what it looked like soon after the opening. If we then crossed over the street to look at the other side, you've got a couple of maps here, and the reason for this is because we're going to look at the Bethel Hospital, and this was in what was used to be known as Committee Street. This was Upper Newport originally when it was part of the French borough, but it became renamed as the Committee Street due to the committee house that used to stand there. This was owned by Francis Wyndham in the 16th century. He was a magistrate and recorder. And when he died, all his estate passed to his wife, except for this particular building, which was sold to pay off his debts. It was bought by the council, and it became known as the committee rooms. And it was used for committee meetings, but it was also, more importantly, the county armoury. And so during the Civil War, this was the site of the Great Blow. Now that all started with our mayor, Johnathan, who relaxed the Puritan constraints over Christmas. He'd been petitioned to see if people could start celebrating Christmas again, and he'd more or less said yes. Some of the Puritans didn't like this. They went down to Westminster, and soon someone came up from Westminster and ordered him to come down to London to explain his behaviour. This annoyed those who were supporting the Royalists, and they started attacking the known Puritans' houses. This, of course, then led to the authorities asking for some soldiers from Dereham who were on their way. And as soon as the rioters heard about this, they broke into the committee house. One suspects that they'd probably been drinking as well at the time. And unfortunately, all the gunpowder there, due to an accident, was lit and exploded and blew up, creating the Great Blow, which led to an enormous amount of damage, including blowing out all the glass in the windows of St. Peter Mancroft and other surrounding buildings. And we can see there the gap that was the remains of where the committee house used to be. that's shown quite clearly on Clear's map in 1696. But this was the site that was chosen by Mary Chapman for the building of her Bethel Hospital. She was the wife of Samuel Chapman, who was the rector of Thorpe, and they both had relatives with mental health problems. And so, of course, she wanted to produce a building that would look after people with mental problems. And it was completed in 1713. When Mary Chapman died in 1724, her will stated that the Bethel was to be run by a board of 7 trustees, and the Bethel Hospital became a public charity and continued on being remodelled, the front of it by Edward Boardman in 1899, and it became part of the National Health Service Child Psychiatry Unit up until 1993, when it moved out. This is a plan of the Bethel. This is the original building, which was a U-shaped building set back from Bethel Street. And we can see that it grew over the years. And the first major extensions were in the middle of the 18th century, turning into a sort of H-shaped building. And it continued to grow and take over quite a large area. And of course, now it is one of the buildings at risk. Particular concern is worried about over the 18th century boardroom, where the stucco is thought to be by William Wilkins and the fireplace by Thomas Rawlins. Purcell's went and studied the area and gave a report. They talk of the condition, particularly of the boardroom, as poor. Structural cracking to the south wall and south end of the east and west walls. No plaster to south wall or south wall ends of east and west walls. Considerable cracking and damp and damage to plaster at the south end of the wall above the dado. Cracking to the cornice, ceiling and ceiling rows. Damp stains to the ceiling throughout. Timber panelling below the dado cracked and window in poor conditions. Floorboards and fireplace surround the grate are in good condition. And these are some photos of the state of the boardroom there, and why it's a building of concern at the moment. The people who took it over to renovate it for homes and houses only managed to do part of it before most of the work stopped. And it is a building that we're very concerned about. I'll try that, they're going in the right direction. Moving on from there, you come to a building known as the Coach and Horses. And the Coach and Horses, we can see a couple of shots of the interior here. There is a Tudor shoe that was found underneath the floorboards that used to be there. It's no longer there if you go in at the moment. I'm not sure where that's disappeared to. And they've also got an interesting map, the bomb map of Norwich up on the wall there, which is still there. It is a largely 16th century jettied building with adjacent stables built in 1710. There are claims, though, that parts of it date back to the 1200s, and this is used to challenge the Adam and Eve, because the Coach and Horses thinks that actually they're older. They're the oldest pub in Norwich and not the Adam and Eve, which can definitely date itself to 1249. Whether that is or is not remains to be seen. But it's an interesting building. And it has some nice parish boundary markers on the outside. These were produced during the beating of the bounds, and we can see there the plates on the left-hand side show SPM, St Peter Mancroft, and on the side SG for St Giles. So this is where the parish boundary runs through and goes through the middle of the pub. And so, of course, when someone goes to the bar to say, where are the toilets, they're always able to say, I'm sorry, I'm afraid you've got to go to the next parish if you want to go to the toilets. And also, the parish boundary ran through the middle of Chapelfield. This is a map of Chapelfield in the 19th century. And for a large part of the time, there was a reservoir in there where water had been pumped up from the River Wensum. And there's a record of in the mid 19th century, when they were beating the bounds, in order to make sure that the whole of it had been covered, somebody got off and took up their clothes and swam the reservoir along the route of the parish boundary and was awarded 2 and 6pence for doing that. And here we've got a map showing it doesn't have the reservoir in it because that had been removed by the end of that, but this is where the boundary runs through, and this building here is the Coach and Horses, and that is the rest of the parish of St Giles marked in red. Moving along, you would have come before the 1940s to another series of buildings. They unfortunately got hit in the raids and were blown apart. So we're looking there at numbers 53, 55 and 57. And one of the areas there was known as Watts Court. And there's another drawing, 19th century drawing of it. You can see the buildings that were lost during the bombing. Watts Court is shown as this entranceway here. Mr. Watts lived a little further up the street. His house is still standing, and we'll come to that. And he was mayor in 1774. No, sorry. Yes, 1774. And he died during the middle of his mayoralty. This Watts Court, the actual pathway, still exists, and you can take it on your way walking up towards Chapelfield Gardens. And according to Plunkett, this Tudor doorway was saved and is in one of the Norwich museums, although I'm not sure which one that is. But it had a lizard in the left spandrel and fern leaves in the right one, according to Mr. Plunkett. And again, this is one of his photographs that we're looking at here. He was also the first mayor who had 2 forenames. John Langley Watts, and he married the daughter of Reuben Deeves, who was won the lottery in the 1760s, won £20,000 apparently. A little further along the street is the house that John Langley Watts lived in, and that one, of course, is still there today, that we can see. Crossing over, I would then take people into St Giles's Terrace, which is tucked away. A lot of people don't know it, which is a lovely early Victorian terrace. And the end house was lived in by Joseph Stannard, who was one of the Norwich artists. Geoffrey Gorham said of this, "Finding it, one can only stand and stare at an aspect that appears to have everything." And later he wrote, "The pickaxe culture, which has contributed so much to our attitudes for the places we live in, has failed to finger its way down these byways." And I think most people would be very pleased that that has happened. It's an interesting terrace. And again, if we move along from that, you will get to another area, which is, there's a dramatic drop, and this is the starting of Pitt Street. And of course, there used to be a pit there, and this was the beginnings of an old cocky. And that cocky which was probably only ever intermittent and only ran with water during thunderstorms and the like. It ran down Willow Lane, which was named after the willows that grew in the corner of the St Giles churchyard, and then would make its way down by St Swithin's towards the River Wensum. At its start in this area here was a pit, which Kirkpatrick said a void place where, in my memory, there was a pit, but some years past it was filled up and paved over with stone, and it possibly had been called Lothmere. It appears like that in one or two old maps, and there is an interesting mention in the Leet roll of the reign of Edward I that William the Skinner was fined for throwing the bodies of cats into it. And of course it ran down after Willow Lane into Ten Bell Lane, and Ten Bell Lane used to be known as Holgate or Holloway before it became paved, and according to Kirkpatrick was gulled and washed hollow by water falling in great rains, etc., down the hill out of Newport and through this lane into Westwood and towards the river. Moving on, I would then take people on another excursion, and this we would head up Ninham's Court, and here you can see the wonderful buildings there, which are known as Ninham's Court, which are a conglomerate of 16th, 17th century complexes that are built over a 14th century undercroft. It can't be seen terribly easily from Ninham's Court itself, and Ninham, it's named that because Ninham was born in the house at the other end of this lane that opens onto Chapelfield Road. It's also of interest because it was here that Nugent Monk lived for a long time, and of course Nugent Monk started the Madder Market Theatre, and before he took over the old Catholic church building and turned it into the Madder Market Theatre, his plays used to be performed in the upstairs room here of Ninham's Court. This again is another building which is one of those on the at-risk register. There have been several attempts in the past to get Norwich Preservation Trust to take it over, which have all failed so far, but I believe they are working on it at the moment as a building that they wish to renovate. We then move on to another spectacular building, Churchman House, and there are two Grade 1 listed buildings in the parish of St Giles, and they're opposite each other. One of them is Churchman's House, and the other is St Giles Church itself. This is a plan of Churchman's House. This comes out of the Pevsner and Wilson book, and it was built by Sir Thomas Churchman. He was the son of Alderman Churchman, and Alderman Churchman had this house, which we can see here, and it faced on to Chapelfield Gardens, and part of it was kept, and those are the parts that we can see outlined in heavy black here of the plan of Churchman House, when his son built this and turned the front of the building around to face Bethel Street. He became knighted in 1751 after he presented an address of congratulations on his marriage to King George III, and in turn was knighted. But he's probably best known because he leased Chapelfield Gardens from the corporation and planted a wonderful series of elms, unfortunately no longer with us, but they were due to Thomas Churchman. So we would then, next to Churchman House, and there it is, find there a gap before crossing over the road into Upper St Giles. Now, it was one continuous route, of course, in the past, and the buildings here also disappeared in the same bombing raid that removed those further down Bethel Street. And this is an old photo touched up of the area. So we've got Churchman House here, and these are the buildings that are no longer there and disappeared in the bombing raid. And we've also got photos by George Plunkett of two of the buildings, this one here and that one there, which used to fill the gap, which is now Cleveland Road, which was put in once the Inner Ring Road was developed. So we would cross over there and make our way up Upper St Giles. Now, Upper St Giles, of course, is near to the gate in the city walls, and anywhere near to a gate has a lot of pubs. And the number of pubs in this area, this, by the way, is what we now call Upper St Giles, and that is Grapes Hill, the original old Grapes Hill. This has been taken from the temperance map, and each red dot indicates a pub. So we'll see what there were. There was, first of all, the Black Horse, which wasn't a pub at the time the temperance map was made, but it was in the past. And it was this inn that the Puritans held their trial of those who were accused of creating the Great Blow. And they tried them on Christmas Day the following year. That, of course, is a building that's still there, and that's what it looked like in the past. There you can still see it standing. If we made our way up that side of the street, the next one you would get is the Cock, and the old pub building is again still there. And we've got the Cock Yard entrance way there. Next, you get to the Queen's Head, which is a pub I actually remember going in the 1970s. When I came up to Norwich to do some work for my dissertation at university. Then you get to a pub which was called the St Giles Gate Stores, and then crossing over what is now Grapes Hill, you come across the Tons, which is no longer called that, and making our way around the Grapes Hotel, which again was badly bombed in the war and partly rebuilt until before being pulled down again a little later. So that's no longer with us. And on the far side, the King's Head and the Vine Tavern. And it was interesting that the Vine Tavern closed in 1910. And one of the arguments for that was that it had had 7 licensees in 7 years, and obviously was not a terribly successful pub. Now, when I used to do the guided walk, I'd make our way along, and we would see Guns Court, this building Guns Court, and it's got a very nice sign outside, which has both the pictures of the gate in the city wall, St Giles Gate, that used to stand there. And so that helps me when doing a guided tour of the area. And once I was talking about this, it used to be owned by Mr. Gunn, the taxidermist, and somebody opened the door and said, "There's a very nice oriel window inside if you'd like to come and have a look." So we did. And that is what you would see on the gable end of that house facing Upper St Giles. But this of course is St Giles Gate, and the upper 2 drawings were made in the 1720s by Mr. Kirkpatrick, and it was Ninham who did these very shortly before the gatehouse itself was pulled down. And they're both the inside and the outside of the gates. It was it appears that it was about 1253 that Norwich started off with its first wall, which was a ditch and a mud wall, probably with a wooden palisade on it. And it wasn't till the end of the 13th century that it was started building a stone wall, largely from the muirage tax that the corporation was allowed to charge the people of Norwich, which helped pay for the wall. And it wasn't until the 1340s that Mr. Spink decided to step in with his money and finish off the building, and in particular the gatehouses. They only seriously challenged 3 times, in 1381 with the Peasants' Revolt, and twice in 1549 with Kett's Rebellion, and they failed each time. But probably the most severe test that they ever had was in December 1480, when they were badly damaged by an earthquake that has since been estimated to be strength of 8 on the European macroseismic scale, which is described as heavily damaging, furniture overturned, cracks, chimneys, partial collapse, and felt-in cars. Although they obviously didn't have any cars at those times. It isn't recorded in the city documents, but it's interesting that in 1481, all the gates and the walls of the city were repaired. And there was another smaller earthquake in 1487, which was probably an aftershock. So outside of those gates, there were 7 cottages which had been granted by Walter Knott in 1308 for leprous people to dwell in. And in 1347, it was turned into a leper hospital by Baldric de Taverum. And Mr. Ede, a 19th century physician at the Norwich Hospital and mayor of the city, mentions that for the visit of Queen Elizabeth I in 1578, the hills were cast down from the flint workings, and the narrow way enlarged to try and beautify the city on the visit of Queen Elizabeth. And of course, since those flint workings have created havoc on the road, with the bus disappearing into it and 1 or 2 other problems. And I usually point out on the way back down St Giles, on the other side of the road, we have one of the old holders of the tram wires that still survived. And there's also a very nice ancient Victorian post box. As we go down, we will, of course, then get to St Giles Church, and St Giles Church is probably a guided tour all on its own. So I'm not sure why we've got those photographs in that order, but we'll get to them in a minute. I put that in because that's one of the Madder Red posts that Hart, Heritage and Economic Regeneration Trust put in Norwich, and they had a beautiful sculpture of one of my favourite gargoyles, which can be seen on St Giles Church. But of course, the church itself is thought to be one of the 3 churches made by the Normans, developed when they developed their 3 new parishes. But Bloomfield goes back and says that actually Elwand, in the time of Edward the Confessor, gave a hall to become a church on this site. Now, we don't really know whether that was true or not. There's nothing really to back that up, but Elwand seems to think that Bloomfield seems to think that this was a pre-conquest church originally, which perhaps the Normans took over later. It is, of course, the tallest of the towers, rising 113 feet. and it's the only one of the Norwich towers that has double buttresses on all of the corners. And it, of course, is fairly high. This is a benchmark at the bottom of the tower, which marks that it was on quite a large, quite a high area anyway. So the benchmark is, if you have a look on a map, is 85 feet, and the tower another 113 feet on top of it. And here we can see the other end of St Giles Church, and the chancel fell down in 1581. It was pulled down, in fact. It was always the responsibility of the church to maintain the chancel, and they thought it wasn't worth rebuilding, so they pulled it down in 1581 and put a bigger east window in there. Obviously, it's reappeared. This was in the 1860s. When there was a Victorian Reformation. And it's interesting to see here that although most of St Giles was rebuilt in the 15th century in fine perpendicular style, when the Victorians built their chancel on the end of it and reinstated it, they decided to choose the decorated style, which they thought was far superior to the perpendicular style. And there's a close-up of the two. That's the original 15th century window, and this is a Victorian restoration in 1866. It was an area where they had a beacon burning in the cresset, and this is the cresset that the wood would have been in, and you can see this inside the church itself, and that's what it looks like. And that was, of course, because it was an extremely tall area. It was also used by the army in the 19th century to practice flag drills, and they tried to signal to people up at the barracks on top of Mousehold Heath. And we then get to the story of John Colton, who was on his way back to Norwich and got lost in the marshes out near Borough. But he said he made his way to safety by following the curfew bell that was being rung in St Giles. So in his will of 1457, he gave an acre in Hayham forever to cause the ringing of the bell called the curfew bell faithfully to be observed in the said church every night. And of course, curfew comes from the French couvre-feu, which meant that as soon as you heard the bell, you had to go to sleep, and the best thing you had to do was cover up your fire so it didn't burn your house down as well. And it was rung at 7:45 p.m. in the winter and 8:45 p.m. in the summer. And it's quite interesting that the area, the acre of land, has been producing a lot of money for the church, and is one of the reasons why St Giles Church is kept in very good condition. And they're benefiting from his money raised from his acre even now. The acre that was referred to in Hayham was down Earlham Road, and there was a house called Curfew Lodge there. There we can see it, and it was more or less next to, there's another view of the Curfew Lodge itself, and a little further down Earlham Road you get a terrace of buildings, and they are known as Curfew Terrace. They were also built on the land that Mr. Colton donated in his will to St Giles Church. There used to be a cottage there, has now since been pulled down, that used to be called Belfield Cottage as well, and that used to be on Earlham Road. If you go into the church and remove one of the carpets on the floor, you'll come across one of our possibly the earliest picture of, image that we have of one of the inhabitants of the French borough. And this is Sir Richard Purdance. Now, he came originally from Ipswich and became a freeman of Norwich in 1394-5, and he had a tenement in the overrow of the market. He was, in fact, one of the last 4 bailiffs that ran Norwich before we got our charter and went over to having mayors. And he was indeed a mayor in 1420 and 1433. This last time he was mayor, he was quite lucky because a very awkward former mayor called Thomas Weatherby had tried to fix it that his man was going to become mayor and not the choice of the people, which was Mr. Purdance that we can see there. It's quite interesting. He was obviously a dog lover. Both he and his wife have got dogs at their feet. And he's one of the first brasses in England to portray someone with a beard. Now, it does also look as though his wife's got a beard, but that is the barb of widowhood. This indicated that she was a widow. She was his second wife, and he died, and she outlived him by another 45 years. And there's a close-up of Mr. Purdance and his beard. He would have been quite good friends with Mr. Baxter, who was also mayor of Norwich. He was another mercer who dealt in a variety of goods. And he was sheriff in 1418 and mayor in 1424 and 1429. He brought in 1 or 2 rules to improve the regulations by which the aldermen and commonalty behaved. He was also quite well off. When he died, he left £520 in bequests, and this was left to his wife on condition that she did not remarry. Now, that might sound a bit mean, but in fact, she might well have requested that, which meant that she wouldn't have then been pestered by a lot of people who wanted to marry her for his money. And she could then possibly devote herself as a vowess to spiritual pursuit after that. And there's a close-up of Mr. Baxter himself. I then make a little detour down Cow Hill, which gets its name after a pub that used to stand there, the Red Cow. And that was there until 1908. And part of the way down it, there is this house. This is a drawing that is from the book by Peter Ede, and it shows what is known as Hooton House. It was lived in by Robert Brettingham. His father ran a bricklaying business in St Giles, and he took this over. He might well have designed this house, but it might also have been by his brother, who was better known, who was Matthew Brettingham, and he became an architect and very much involved in finishing off Hooton Hall, as well as designing and building Gunton Hall and Langley Park. Now, it's called Hooton House, because it's supposed to have a resemblance to Hooton Hall. So let's have a look. It is now, and there's Hooton Hall. Is it? I don't know. There's another very interesting thing that in Sir Peter Ede's book, which was published in the late 19th century, he said that it was lived in, this house, by William Patience, who was another architect. And he says he lived in a house which he built and called Hooton House for its resemblance to a miniature Hooton Hall. Carrying on down there, we then get to the plain at the bottom of the hill here. And this is an interesting area because it's where 4 parishes meet. So we have the parish of St Benedict, parish of St Swithin, St Margaret, and up here the parish of St Giles. And there is a very early stone parish boundary marker on the pub there, which is, I think, the earliest one in Norwich. And that's showing the boundary, the parish boundary between St Margaret and St Giles. And that can be found on the edge of the pub there at the moment. That pub is now called come to me in a minute. It's gone. But it used to be it used to be known as the Duke of York, and remained as the Duke of York until the victory of Lord Raglan over the Russians in 1854, when it became known as the Alma. And that stayed on until 1975, when it shut down and it reopened as Micawber's, and that's what it's called today as well. If you go behind Micawber's and turn right into the area where the first Jenny Lind Hospital used to be, was originally set up, you come to a house that was lived in by George Borough. And here it is. You'll see it there. Now, Borough was born in Dereham, but soon moved to Norwich, to this building indeed. And he was articled to a solicitors, Simpson and Rackham, in Tuck's Court, which was an area which was swept away when they built City Hall. He wasn't really interested in becoming a solicitor. He was more interested in languages, and supposedly was fluent in 12 of them. So when his legal apprenticeship ended, he went to London and travelled widely and joined the British and Foreign Bible Society. He wrote Lavengro, which is a Romany word for wordmaster, and in that book there is the paragraph that includes, "A fine old city, Norwich, truly that is, view it from whatever side you will, but it shows best from the east." And it is from his book that we get our Norwich, a fine city. And that is a photograph of Tuck's Court, where his solicitor's training took place before, again, as I say, it was swept away. After passing that, that, by the way, was a museum to George Borough for a long time, until that's after it had been bought by the Lord Mayor, Arthur Samuel. He bought the house and presented it to the city. And it stayed as a museum up until 1994, when they sold it, and the money was used to set up the George Borough Trust. Sorry about this. Let's move on. Making our way back up Willow Lane, there's another interesting building we find here. It's got its little plaque, and that tells us that Bloomfield, the historian Francis Bloomfield, lived here. And he lived here while he was writing his history of Norfolk, and presumably selling it then, which is volume 3 of the Bloomfield Histories. Passing on from there, you get to the Willow Lane Catholic Chapel. So this didn't appear until after the 1826 Catholic Emancipation Act, which allowed Catholics to worship. And so this building was built by the aforementioned Mr. J.T. Patience. And interestingly, he chose the Palladian style, which is usually reserved for nonconformists. But obviously it pleased the Catholics at the time. It stayed as a chapel up until St. John's had been built at the turn of the 19th century. And once that became the largest parish church in Norwich, or possibly the UK, This stopped being a chapel because everyone went to St John's, and it turned into a Catholic school, which it remained as a Catholic school up until 1869, and we've some photographs of it there. And this is another building that was by John Patience. That was for the Methodists, and it used to be in Lady Lane, and that was pulled down to build the library, the 1960s library, which of course burnt down and has been replaced by the Forum. When this ceased being a chapel and a Catholic school, it was altered by Michael Innes in 1990s and turned into a solicitor's building and nicely restored. Coming up to the top of Willow Lane, if you crossed over, you would go into Rigby's Court. Dr. Edward Rigby was an assistant surgeon to the Norfolk and Norwich in 1771 and became a full surgeon in 1790, and was associated with the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital for a good 50 years. And he was the first person to introduce vaccinations to the city. He had 12 children, including one birth of quadruplets. None of them, unfortunately, survived beyond 11 weeks. And he was also in Paris when the revolution started, apparently, managed to get out safely. And he was uncle of Sir William Edward Parry, who, until 1875, is the person who had been furthest north in the North Pole on an attempt to get to the North Pole. That takes us into St Giles Street and on our way down. And it's interesting, St Giles has at least 26 listed buildings from here until we get to the marketplace. And this is an interesting one. This is the Masonic House, although the Masons have just sold it. It's just been sold. And I'm not sure who's purchased it, but it's in need of a costly redesign to the roof, which the Masons didn't feel that they could cope with. But this is where originally Reuben Deves lived. He was the one who I mentioned earlier, whose daughter married John Langley Watts, and he won the lottery in the 18th century, supposedly won £20,000. His house was pulled down when the Masonic Lodge wanted to build this one, which was, of course, built in a neo-Baroque, and it was designed by Albert Havers, who was the great-grandfather of the actor Nigel Havers. And it's built from Monk's Park stone. The temple, the Masonic temple at the back, was added by S.J. Waring and built over their original bowling green. Moving along, there used to be a building a little further along St Giles known as Gilman's offices, and Gilman started the Norwich and London Accident Insurance Association, which was in this building here. And we can see from a photograph here that very little has changed in St Giles. This is St Giles in the late 19th century, and this is St Giles today. But if we look at where Gilman House used to be, we can see that is something that has changed. And that, of course, is what is known as a telephone house, sometimes anyway. And it is a lovely George Skipper building which was produced for the Norwich and London Accident Association, 1904 to 1906, again in neo-Baroque. Quite an amazing building because it's in such a narrow street, really. It's very difficult to get far back enough from it to make the most of it. It has 7 bays, shallow bays, and the two projecting short wings with Doric columns on a granite plinth, and the stepped back attic story. And it was built on the site where God's house used to be. Now, God's house was shown on Taylor's map. Richard Cowling Taylor, who was born at Banham, became a geologist. He was a disciple of William Smith, the father of geology. And in 1821, published his Index Monasticus with maps of all religious places in Norfolk and Suffolk. And he did one special map for Norwich. And here we can see this is where God's house was at Newport. Newport being Lower Newport being the name for the French borough in the early days. And it was given by the land was given by John Le Grant to be as an almshouse, and later it was known as Grant's Hospital. It was rebuilt in 1472 by Bishop Leichhardt, and after the it was dissolved in 1547 and then pulled down by a house by belonging to Richard Gamble was built on its site. That, of course, has later got pulled down and had the Skipper building put on top of it. But it's on top of 15th century cellars underneath, which I was doing a guided tour at one point when someone who used to work in Telephone House said that there were an awful lot. She used to do the filing, which was down there in the crypt, and there were quite a lot of people who refused to go anywhere near it because they were worried about the numbers of ghosts that were there. But it didn't bother her. She managed to get on quite happily with that. So that became the Skipper building that we know, founded in the 1856 and rebuilt in 1906. And there we can see the broken pediment and the face that always seems to appear in the front of George Skipper's buildings. And if you look at the granite columns, you can see they've got these wonderful long feldspar phenocrysts in the granite. And this is a view down St Giles Street, which at first glance, of course, seems quite heavily Victorian, but these are modern facings that have been put onto buildings that are largely Elizabethan, and most of those have interesting undercrofts all the way down it as well. But we can see it hasn't changed much. This is the picture today. So we're nearly back at the end of the French borough. And I thought I'd just mention Mortimer's Hotel, which has now become taken over by the Salvation Army, which was originally a pub. It was the New Inn in the 18th century, and was rebuilt in the 19th century. It's quite an interesting building. And again, up here, we'll see it's on a parish boundary. And a little lower down, probably about here, there's the remains. Those are the parish boundary markers. Again, St Giles, and over here is Peter Mancroft. And down here, there's the remains of an 18th century stone boundary marker as well. And to finish with, my final slide is this one. And I've put this in because it's interesting that Spurgeon, which is his name, is a variant of Perdance, who we saw in the brass in St Giles Church. So I just wondered if possibly he might be a descendant of Mr Perdance originally. And 81 St Giles Road was where his dairy was, and it's now a delicatessen. Anyway, that takes us back to the marketplace, and we've finished our tour of the French borough. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. That's a very interesting talk. Jess, are you able to field any questions from the chat?
Yes, we haven't had any questions through yet, but please, yes, pop any questions in the chat or pop your hand up. It's a bit, I haven't got two screens tonight, so it's a bit difficult to see if you have got your hand up. So it might be best just to unmute yourselves. But yeah, we'll try the chat or yeah, if anybody's got any immediate questions.
Jonathan, could you stop sharing your screen, please?
Oh, yeah. There we go.
You obviously covered absolutely everything, so nobody has any questions whatsoever.
Sorry, it's Simon Wood. Can I ask a question? I was slightly late in joining. I do apologise. Fascinating talk. Why was it called the French Borough? I guess you covered that at the very beginning.
Yes, I did, because the whole area was open space at the time that the Normans came, and they just moved their marketplace from Tombland, so it was under the eye of the castle on one side, and it was under the eye of the areas where the French decided to settle. They created 3 new parishes: St Stephen's, St Peter Mancroft, and St Giles. Although there's a bit of dispute about St Giles.
Right, thank you. So can I ask another question?
You can, yes.
The parish markers that you showed, I guess they're cast lead up on the walls.
So, could you say that again? Sorry.
So the parish boundary markers that you showed that are joining a number of on some of the walls on the buildings, I'm assuming they're in lead castings of some sort. And were they on all the major roads around the parish where the parish boundary was?
It was. I mean, they used to beat the bounds at rogation time, which is sort of in the summer every few years, so that everybody remembered exactly where the parish boundary ended. And it was only really in the period of the early 19th century that they started putting markers up. And I'm not too sure what they're made of. The earliest ones we got were stone, but they obviously got replaced with the metallic ones.
You think they are lead? They're made of the same sort of material as the fire markers, the insurance markers?
Yeah, I think probably. We lost a couple from the Assembly House in the fire. They melted and disappeared. And 1 or 2 are in Bridewell as well, which were taken from buildings that have been pulled down.
There's a question in the chat from Anna Allison. She says, I believe the Rigby quads may be the earliest verifiable live birth of quads. The parish gave the parents a commemorative plaque, I think, on their birth.
Oh, that's interesting. That I didn't know. Yeah, I think it's quite likely.
Without fertility drugs too. The production of quads must have been unusual at that time.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Maggie says, the second brass showed the man standing on a mound, ? What was this? The previous brass had dogs. Yes,
they were obviously dog lovers, and I think they probably rather wanted that, or the people who commissioned the brass did. Yes, I've wondered that. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, but I just wonder actually if Mr. Baxter was rather a short man, and he was put on a mound so he wasn't dominated by his wife. I don't know. That's a pure guess, that, and I don't know how accurate the brasses were at portraying people's heights as well. I expect there's someone around who knows about brasses.
So not bags of money then?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Although they were both well off. Mr. Baxter also paid for a hermit who lived in some of the time. He was called Sir Richard Furness, who lived some of the time in the hermitage at the end of the churchyard of St. Giles. And he paid for him to go to Rome and Jerusalem and do 7 circumnavigations of the city, saying prayers for him, all to speed him up through purgatory. And it must have been quite a nice little jolly for some of the hermits at the time to go off and do that sort of thing.
It's a rather extreme version of sending people on pilgrimage to Walsingham or something, which you do see in wills quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Rome and Jerusalem just that little bit further.
Yeah, he got a good one. I don't know if he actually went or not. I expect so.
Well, if there's no more questions, then it falls to me, since Mary's absent, to thank you, Johnathan, for an extremely interesting and comprehensive tour of a city which many of us think we know a lot about, but obviously nowhere near as much as you do. But it also goes to show that change is inevitable, and unless buildings and areas meet the current needs and demands of the people, then they're going to be altered or demolished.
Mm-hmm.
Which seems a shame, but on the other hand, you have to have progress in order to get the Boardman buildings and everything else that goes with it. So thank you very much for the talk, and I'll invite everyone to unmute themselves and say thank you in the normal way, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank
Great.
you.
Very enjoyable.
pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, difficult to talk when you can't see any audience when you're a guide. I'm a tour guide. I know how it is. Thank you so much. Wonderful evening.
Thank
you.
you. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to end the call now for everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night, everybody.
Good night.